Life is Strange. It's a game that seems to be right up my alley, doesn't it? It's a game that adopts the same basic premise of one of my favorite video games of all time, that being Telltale's The Walking Dead, which I did a video on a while ago. A game that is heavily based around its story and changes depending on the choices that you, the player, make. Life is Strange is a game that follows that format to a T, but why is it that I don't feel super strongly about it? Just take a seat, and let me tell you why Life is Strange is the greatest mediocre masterpiece in video game history. Knowing most of my viewers, I'm assuming you already have a basic understanding of the game I'm about to discuss. In the easiest way possible, Life is Strange, for a complete lack of a better term, is a strange game. A story that splashes the player with harsh realities in the form of a point-and-click style game, while also drowning the player with the question of choice, and the psychological horrors that accompany the power of it. A game by Don't Nod, that, on a basic level, captures the Telltale model. You explore the world of Life is Strange interacting with objects, people, and whatever the game allows you to, with a single button press. The game is filled with puzzles that the player has to figure out. Never anything too difficult, but just enough to keep the player engaged in between major cutscenes. The cutscenes include mountains of dialogue that teach us about characters, the plot, and also the world around us. It is a game that has branching plots that are reflected on the choices you make along the way. These choices are what tie Life is Strange to the Telltale model. The game actively tells you that your choices matter. Like Telltale, your choices affect the episodes in the future, and the game breaks down your choices and compares them with other players at the end of each episode respectively. The one thing that is most noticeable that separates Life is Strange from Telltale is, oddly enough, the timer. Timers in Telltale games is what gives your choices substance. They force the player to trust their instincts rather than overanalyzing how a decision will affect every single person. But unlike Telltale, when you enter a choice in Life is Strange, you are not given that added pressure of a short amount of time to figure out what you're going to do or say. You instead have all the time in the world to analyze exactly what you want to do in that particular situation. So much so that in Life is Strange, not only can players dilly-dally over huge choices, but they are also allowed to rewind time to see the outcome of even the most basic conversations. Don't Nod gives you the luxury of picking and choosing exactly how your story is going to go. This simple gameplay mechanic throws everything Telltale stands for, which is living and growing with your decisions, and tosses it out the window. The developers of Life is Strange wanted to tell a story of what exactly would happen if someone were to have this power and abuse it for their own gain. And as everyone who has experienced this game knows, it doesn't end well in the slightest. One of my biggest complaints of Life is Strange is the fact that this entire story can be completely split in half. While these two halves of the story contain the same characters, the genres could not be farther off. The first half of the story is about understanding who you are and living with the power within yourself. As the main character, you are learning to grow as a person, which slots the genre and theme as a coming-of-age story. The second half, however, completely overcomplicates and pushes away these themes and eventually overtakes the entire genre and spits the story out as a supernatural drama. Then, as you see the hell of a dramatic climax the story gives you, you as the player are forced to decide which genre and theme you wish to see conclude. Whether you want a calm story about self-reflection and growth, or if you want to see how millions of lives will be sacrificed for one. The player makes the ultimate choice at the very end of the game. Now, in order to come to a conclusion on this game, let's become Max and rewind a bit. Max is a student at Blackwell Academy in Oregon. She is a character that is relatable for most people, someone you could describe as shy and awkward, not a social outcast, but not someone well known either. Unlike most of the people at her school, she doesn't really have friends. She is a character that is living on her own for the first time, and has to learn to deal with this environment shift all on her own. As a person who is studying photography, that is where her true passion lies. We can see as she discusses topics with her famous photography professor, and whenever Max decides to take a photo as well. Like most, Max is a character that lets her personal challenges hold her back from reaching her fullest potential. Sure, she is passionate about photography, but she is also someone who is too scared to submit her work to big competitions, despite the encouragement of others. In the first episode, we are introduced to the reason why Max is so special. Max walks in on two students in the school bathroom arguing, and the situation escalates until one of them pulls a gun on the other and shoots, leaving the student to bleed out with a bullet straight in her abdomen. By extending her hand, Max discovers her unique ability to rewind time, allowing her to reverse the situation almost as if she has an undo button in real life. After a certain amount of attempts, she is able to stop the murder from occurring, and with this new supernatural power, continues her life on campus as if nothing happened. After saving the girl from almost certain death, we bump into her again in the student parking lot, and this girl turns out to be Chloe, Max's childhood friend. The two catch up with one another, and eventually Max puts her cards on the table and tells Chloe about her abilities. After learning about her new best friend's superpowers, Chloe asks for Max's help in searching for her missing friend, Rachel Amber. Following this decision, Life is Strange adopts a way of storytelling that most video games don't usually follow. Rather than following a cohesive plot, Don't Nod rather continues the story with different scenes that are relating, but also not at the same time. These scenes of Max and Chloe are loosely based around the search for Amber, but also have their own lessons to be learned from each one. Each of these episodes introduce different choices that determine what type of person Max is going to be, choosing whether to be with a boy that truly loves you and promises stability, or going with a wild girlfriend, making fun of someone who is rude to you, or being the bigger person and comforting her in her time of vulnerability, choosing whether to be involved with a security guard and a student, or taking a picture of the event for the sake of your passion. Similar to Telltale, Life is Strange is asking the player questions of who they want Max to be, questioning you on what do you value more in relationships, questioning your ethics, and questioning what is more important to you, connections or your career. All of these questions are placed on the foundation of being able to rewind time, but this is the real issue. While giving the player the luxury to go back in time, you get to see just how making these decisions mess with the other choices you could have made. Every choice is surrounded by an opportunity cost. Don't Nod forces the player to feel bad for sacrificing another character for the sake of either your own happiness or someone else's. No matter what Max chooses, Life is Strange forces the overarching theme of cost. No matter what you do, you cannot have everything. There is no right or wrong answer, and no matter what, you will hurt someone. Like most games in this format, there are going to be choices that don't really feel like choices. What kind of monster would I be if I chose to kill a dog for no reason? But surrounding these choices, there are smaller situations that involve helping others out of the goodness of your heart. You can save a girl from getting splashed by street water, but what exactly does that do to evolve the story? Nothing. There is no big sacrifice for doing something that any morally righteous human would do. This game tends to tackle topics that most video games and other sources of media don't usually dip their toes into. Life is Strange has smaller themes about lesbian romance, along with suicide, and a number of other topics people may be sensitive to. And especially at the time, these topics weren't as widely expected from certain sources of media. Honestly, I have to give it to Don't Nod for even having the guts to tackle so many of these themes all in one package. Where I do have to critique is how the writers actively execute these themes. Namely, in the suicide scene, the player wants to stop the student from killing herself, obviously. But instead of actively trying to be a conversation about showing her the importance of her life, it is rather a pop quiz for the player to regurgitate the information they learned about the character to her face. Although this game has its fair share of flaws when it comes to executing these themes well, the writers mean exactly what they are delivering to us, even if it is a bit awkward and has elements of indecision. Similar to the main character, these plots are innocent, their hearts are in the right place, but they also shine a light of ignorance to the true issue at hand. Jumping into the second half of the game, we follow Max and Chloe to the end of Amber's story. A story that isn't about a naive girl putting herself in danger, but rather a story about a girl who was drugged, kidnapped, exploited, and murdered in an underground photo studio. While looking for the culprit, Max is drugged and falls over as she is forced to watch her best friend Chloe die once again right before her eyes. After waking up in a chair face to face with your photography professor, Max realizes he was the killer the whole time. After the first section of the game, Life is Strange finally strings everything together into what it deems is its plot. All of the little scenes that could be deemed as background fluff from the first section now have morphed into new actual plot points. While these scenes may have fit into a real coming-of-age story, in the context of Life is Strange, they are more often ridiculous than anything else. For example, the love triangle displayed in the story is a common trope in most romantic stories, which are often accompanied by coming of age. But in Life is Strange, one of your choices is a stable guy who you can see genuinely cares about you, and another is a girl who is literally ripping the fabric of time apart just by existing. The entire narrative is not based around a coming-of-age story. There is a real villain here, being Mr. Jefferson. Rather than the more common antagonists of society in other coming-of-age stories, Life is Strange isn't about Max becoming who you want her to become, but rather it is a story about rewinding time and fixing mistakes, until you find an ending you are genuinely satisfied with. Chloe is not a possible different life for Max, but rather someone who is fueling the end of the world. Max's powers are not a reflection of a person's inability to make choices, but rather a way to spotlight the role main characters have and how their actions can affect the world around them. Now this second half really brings me back to the comparison of Telltale and Life is Strange. The main gripe about Telltale is that they don't uphold their promise of adapting the game series around the choices the player makes. Players sometimes feel that their decisions don't carry much weight, and there is always going to be a similar outcome no matter what they do. As that may be true in certain instances, Life is Strange would rather criticize Telltale for even daring to propose a promise like that in the first place. Rather, Life is Strange makes the player question if they even want that responsibility at all. Using an extension to Max's powers, Max is able to jump back in time. With the use of trial and error to find a different timeline where Jefferson is in jail and Chloe is safe, Max finds a new mentor and is famous for her photography. She was unable to submit in the past. Being in San Francisco as the star of the show, Max is brought back into reality we all know too well. There is always a cost for happiness. Max checks in on Chloe and finally realizes that although this new timeline is amazing for her, other people have to suffer because of her success. Similar to every single superhero movie out there, we are taught the lesson that with power, there is always responsibility. But not only that, Life is Strange introduces a new message that power is horrifically dangerous. Rather than letting herself be a normal student, with the use of her power, Max puts herself in terrible situations that brings harm to the rest of the people she cares about, in an effort to save them. Unlike Telltale games, where it just so happens that all the major decisions are purposely put on the player's shoulders, Life is Strange is a game that forced the protagonist to put herself in those situations where she needs to make the most impactful decisions. Max comes to realize near the end of the story that no matter what she does, she cannot go back and change the past, and make it something it was never fated to be. The crazy, bizarre issues we face as the story goes on are the result of Max's time hopping. In an effort to make things better, Max has caused infinitely worse suffering for more people than she could have ever realized. The more she tries to fix, the more broken everything becomes. After coming to terms that Max's perfect ending is not a true conclusion to this complex narrative, the player is given another chance to save her friend. Max reverses time and throws away her happiness for a single person once again. Life is Strange is a game that convinces you it is a coming-of-age story, then proceeds to spit in the player's face over and over again as the player slowly begins to uncover the true meaning behind the story. It was at this point in the story that when I faced new scenes of unfortunate events, I truly began to question the game's offer of going back in time to change the outcome I was served. On one hand, the offer is enticing, as I want to believe that there is some way I could help the people who are hurt. But on the other, that is exactly what Life is Strange is trying to get you to understand. A person shouldn't have this much power in the first place. The thought should not be crossing your mind when you see someone murdered. No one in the world should have this responsibility. The game does an immense job at making the player question the purpose of their choices. Why is it that I should rewind time? Why should I save Chloe again if the world is screaming at me to do exactly the opposite? Why should I try to save Jefferson from dying if there is a giant tornado going to wipe out the city anyway? Why should I want the burden of being the main character and making all of these choices if they don't seem to matter in the long run anyway? With more and more trial and error, you finally find Chloe once again. The player finally realizes the price they had to pay to save a singular person. In order to save her and fix your mistakes, you created a complete and utter hellish scenario multiple innocent people have to face due to your own actions. The game knows exactly how the player must feel right now, and to me, that feeling is clear. It is nothing less than emotional guilt. It is complete and utter disgust with your own actions because you know that no matter if your heart was in the right place, you are causing the suffering of so many others. Life is Strange is a game that, once reaching the pinnacle of the story, asks the player if they want to rewind one last time. When Chloe pushes you towards trying one last time, and your attachment to her pulling you away from that option, the player is given the choice to either sacrifice someone you love, or sacrifice an entire city's worth of lives out of the reasoning of love. On one hand, letting go of someone you love is what Max has to do for the greater good of society. Most of the time, your responsibilities are more important than your personal pleasures, and that is Max's coming of age. But on the other hand, Life is Strange is a game that has been shoving the message onto you that you have to live with your mistakes. Nothing you do will actually do anything to make it better. Instead, you, just like any normal person, should not have the option to go back. You should not have the ability to turn the clock back and create something new, just so you don't have to feel the guilt you caused yourself to have. This is my genuine problem with Life is Strange. It is a game that has two completely contrasting themes and messages that are slammed headfirst into each other, and are so incompatible that once you choose one, it feels like you are completely ignoring the other, which almost half the game has been promoting this whole time. No matter what you choose, no matter how much you justify that an ending is the correct one, you are losing the entire meaning behind almost half the lessons this game has been trying to make you see throughout the entirety of your playthrough. Life is Strange introduces two themes of moving past your mistakes and sacrificing your own needs for everyone else's at the exact same time as one another. But in reality, no one in the real world ever has this type of choice. It is not something we as people have control over. We are not Max, and cannot rewind time to erase the actions we made. Coming of age is understanding how to perform both at the same time. And rather than choosing whether to use the superpower or not, we are normal people. Choosing our morals, that is coming of age. So now we are at the conclusion of the story. On one hand, saving Chloe is an ending that results in countless deaths, and on the other, Choosing to go back in time once more disproves everything the second half of the story was trying to explain. That yes, if you did mess with the timeline once again, everything would have been alright, shoving the entire theme of the other choice into the dirt. And that was Life is Strange. I genuinely don't know my true feelings on this game. They are extremely mixed. On one hand, I can appreciate a story that is trying to teach people lessons that aren't normally touched on, but I also cannot deny the terrible writing decisions that the developers made when crafting this story. Maybe in the future I will finally understand a different perspective on what this game means to the masses. But for now, that was my understanding of the mediocre masterpiece that is Life is Strange. Thank you for watching.